Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm just going to give everyone just a couple minutes to get logged in. And while we do that, I am just going to do some quick housekeeping. So I always like to start off with a sound check just to make sure everybody can hear me. So if you can hear me and see me okay, go ahead, just say hello, tell me who you are and where you're from. So go ahead and just type that in the chat box there. You can see that there is a chat icon on the right side of your screen. Go ahead and type in the chat. Just let me know who you are, where you're from, and just say hello. And we will get started in just a couple minutes here while I let everybody get logged on. So thank you so much, first of all, for taking the time out of your busy lives to spend time with me tonight and listen to this information that I am so excited to share with you. So we'll just do a couple quick housekeeping things and then we'll get going. So first of all, I know everybody always asks me about CMHs, CEUs. So this presentation is for CMHs. It's different from CEUs, but ASHA will accept it for certification maintenance if you have a completion certificate. So again, ASHA will accept it. I will be sending you a completion certificate afterwards. You're responsible for knowing requirements for any other certifications you have, state specific and things like that beyond ASHA, but I will send that to you after. And then also, because you have shown up live, you've shown that extra level of commitment to be here with me tonight, and I'm so thankful for that. I am going to be sharing my copy and paste scripts for report writing, which has shaved hours off my time that I spend writing paperwork. And this is also something that I will be emailing you after. Again, it's just test descriptions so that you can quickly pick the right language assessment for your student, and then also use my descriptions. You can literally copy and paste them and include those in some of your narrative descriptions when you're writing reports. So be checking your email for that afterwards. I'll be sending some of those things out a couple hours after this presentation and tomorrow. So I always like to start out by just letting you know, because all of you have shown up live, I want to help you decide if you should stay on, and so that you know if you are actually in the right place and if this training is for you. So go ahead and type yes in the chat if this sounds like you. So if you've never really had a good system for language therapy and you know that you're supposed to feel like an expert when you get all those referrals, but you don't always feel like one. And maybe sometimes you feel like a fraud because you're not exactly sure what you're supposed to be doing. So if that sounds familiar, go ahead and type yes in the chat. And then also, if you're tired of wondering what an SLP is supposed to be doing for literacy-based issues, and maybe you're kind of embarrassed because you think it's something that you should know by now, or if you have students who you feel could make some legit progress if you just taught them the right skills, but you aren't really sure where to start and you just don't have a good process. And you know, hey, these students could be successful in school and in life. They could go on to lead successful adult lives if I just give them the right start now, but you're not quite sure what to do. So you're also in the right place if you've experienced all of those things and you want to change that. You want to make a change and instead go to work confident, feeling like the expert that you thought you would be and that you wanted to be when you decided to become an SLP. I mean, we all really wanted to change the world when we decided to go into this profession to begin with. But I know a lot of us have found when we've actually got out into the workplace that, you know, sometimes we hit some roadblocks. So anyways, go ahead and type yes if any of that sounds like you. And I wanted to come clean about something myself, even though obviously now, you know, if you're familiar with my site, I've sent some free resources to you this week. And, you know, I can proudly say that I am a language expert, but back when I started in 2004, I felt the exact same way that I just described to you. I did not feel like I knew what I was doing when it came to language. It was the class I hated the most in grad school. it was the worst grade I got in grad school, and it never made sense to me. And I was like, I just want to go medical. I don't want to deal with any of this stuff. The Arctic stuff is fine, but with language, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I didn't even really like it because it didn't make sense to me. It just seemed so huge and nebulous. And, you know, I'm proud to say that I wanted to quit. I wanted to just get out of the schools after my first half of a year. I started in the middle of the school year, and I worked until the end of the school year, wanted to just go into the hospital or something like that. But, you know, instead, just because of a personal situation, I stayed at the same job. And after a while, just really got curious. And I ended up going back for my doctorate in special ed and really made language my area of specialty. And I found that I felt completely different once I had a system and once I felt confident. And I want to share that process and that system that I use with you tonight. But what I was able to do, and the most important thing here is that I went from feeling like this. So it was like I had all of these language skills that I wanted to address with my students. I knew they had all these things that they were struggling with. And I was literally just grabbing random crap off my shelves, trying to figure out what I should be doing with them. And so my system for language therapy looked about as organized as this office does right now, with stuff just everywhere. And I would just be pulling random things. And yeah, I was doing some things right, but I didn't have a process, and I was jumping around so much that my students weren't getting better. So what I found was I was writing a lot of goal updates like this, where it was like not making progress, 40% accuracy. And then I'd be writing the goal again. And it was like, wow, I'm writing these IEP goals. Shouldn't they be meeting some of them? Or shouldn't I see some of my students maybe getting into the general education classroom more and being more independent? Or maybe shouldn't I be dismissing some of these kids? Isn't that the whole point of therapy, is to work yourself out of the job? And I found when I changed my approach and when I learned to do what I'm going to share with you tonight, I went from doing goal updates like this to what I'm going to share with you in this quick case study here. So I wanted to share this one, and this is an example. And I've had other cases like this, but I think this one just really highlights the aha moment I had. So this student that I had was one of the first kids who I dismissed because he was better, not because he'd plateaued. And we basically said, you know, there hasn't been significant progress. I guess we'll just dismiss. And because I had a lot of cases like that, where when we got to a certain point, they're in junior high, it's like, well, okay, I guess we're done with speech. Even though they hadn't really gotten better, they'd just plateaued, or maybe they weren't really participating in therapy because they weren't very motivated. This was one of the first cases where I actually dismissed a kid because they had met their goals. So he started out in kindergarten with a speech and language IEP, and his literacy scores on the district reading benchmarks, so the things that they do 3 times a year for all the kids to see who needs the extra interventions, he was in the 10th percentile. And he was one of those kids where I thought, okay, he only has speech now, but we will be getting this student a full case study, and we will eventually be looking at other services for this student. And eventually, we're probably going to need more. And what happened was, when I actually worked on the right skills with him, he actually, on the screen here, you can see that he started in kindergarten in the 10th percentile. By the time he was in 3rd grade, his literacy scores had bumped up to the 45th percentile. So he was well in the average range. And when I started with him in kindergarten, his language scores were in the 70s. But when we worked on focused language skills, this is where his scores were in third grade. So you can see that he's got some in the low average, and then he's got a handful of scores that are actually solidly in the average range. So it is possible for some students to actually boost those language skills and get out of special ed. And this student, I was able to send him on to fourth grade without any IEP, without any special accommodations or anything like that. Now, I've had other kids that maybe they were in the special ed classroom all day, and we just got them to the point that they were still getting services, but maybe they were in the general education classroom for most of their day, and they just got pulled out for extra help. Obviously, we can't dismiss everyone, but the point is that you can make drastic improvements to what you're doing instead of just writing the same goals over and over again. Now, before I move on, I do see some questions coming up in the chat. I will, at the very end, take some time to answer questions about just any technical issues or anything like that. If you are having some connectivity issues, make sure that you're not streaming anything else. And sometimes if you log out and log back in, that helps as well if something is really freezing up. And there will be a replay link that goes out for you tomorrow as well, for both for people who attend live and if you have to leave for some reason. But I will take some time to answer questions at the end. So if you do have a question about the content that I'm sharing, make sure to stick around to the end. And I will be sharing some information, some time-sensitive information as well. So the point is that I found that it was possible to actually make progress with these students. And it came because I was focusing on the right skills. And so I was writing more progress updates that looked a little more like this, where it was like, hey, he mastered the goal. And most importantly, I was able to do that without spending hours and hours planning. So this is a picture of me with my family. And the important thing is that I was able to get home to my family. I wasn't spending all night and weekend working because I had a very clear focus about what I was doing. So once I did that initial research to figure out a good system, planning became a lot easier. So the good news is that you can get results like this if you learn what I'm going to share with you tonight. But the bad news is that nothing will change if you don't invest in yourself and invest in the time to learn those things. And obviously, you've already taken the first step by being here tonight and showing that level of commitment. So you're already part of the way there. So before we move on, just some goals I have for you today. And before I tell you the goals and get into this, I will say that, as some of you know, that I do have a blog and a website, and I offer a lot of different free and paid trainings. So free trainings like the one that you're watching tonight. And I'm able to do that because I also offer paid courses and services as well. I will be mentioning one of those at the end, but regardless of whether you just watched this free presentation or whether you take me up on that at the end, these are the things that I hope you leave this presentation being able to do. So for you to learn that one thing, so that one key area that has a huge impact on academic performance that tends to be a key culprit for kids with language disorders. And for you to learn the 5 components that fit under that broad umbrella that really function as your system. And for you to be able to evaluate what you're already doing so that you can eliminate some of those less important skills on your to-do list. Because let's be honest, we probably have massive to-do lists. And I want you to be able to get better results with less effort. Yes, obviously, nothing that these massive breakthroughs, they don't come easy, but chances are that there are times that we're really swimming upstream and working on things that maybe aren't the best use of our time. So I want you to be able to do that as well and pick and choose those things that really make a true impact. So let's get to what those things are. And this is the big question here is there really one skill that will determine whether a student will succeed or fail in school? And then not just in school, but life beyond school, because obviously school is supposed to prepare them for life. So when we think about that, I want to just ask you really quickly, obviously we're all working with kids who have academic issues, that have language processing issues. So just let me know, yes, in the chat, are you working on any of these things? Or do you have students who struggle with any of these things? So just general comprehension. So you read something to them or they read something and they're not able to tell you what they just read. Or getting the big picture, stating the main idea, answering inferencing questions, or just summarizing, retelling information. So yes, obviously, people are saying, yes, these are things that we work on all the time. These are things that we need to do in school in order to succeed. And we obviously would need to do them if we were in any type of work setting beyond school. So very important skills. So obviously, if you have identified these things as areas of concern in your students, you are on the right track. But and what a lot of us end up doing, it's what I end up doing, and this is right some of the time, but what a lot of us end up doing is working on these things directly, partially because we want our therapy to be relevant to the curriculum. And this looks a lot like what kids have to do in school and in their classroom. And we want to work on those skills and make our therapy helpful for that student and for them to be able to generalize that. We want it, and it's the term that we often use is contextualized therapy or curriculum-based therapy. So yes, these skills are important, but here's the problem with if you're only working on these things, or if you've got this massive laundry list of things and these are just some of those things on there. And that is that if we're going to make a lasting impact on language, not only can we not jump around, but we need to treat the cause, not just the symptoms. And a lot of times those type of issues are really a symptom of a deeper underlying cause when it comes to a student with a language disorder. And so if we're trying to work on those things, and then we're trying to work on grammar and syntax and vocabulary and WH questions and whatever else that's coming up, we're working on a lot of things and we end up spreading ourselves very thin and burning ourselves out and burning our students out. And so when we get scattered like that, it's really hard to make progress in any one area. And so, as I like to say, not just treat the cause, not the symptom, but also don't half-ass two or more things, whole-ass one thing. So instead of trying to work on all of this, focus and find that key area that makes a true impact and really hone in on that, because that's when we can make that lasting impact, when we focus and when we narrow it down. So let's talk about what that is and how that works and why it works. So first, we want to find the skills that make that biggest impact. So think of it like dominoes. We really want to find that first domino. So obviously you've got a lot of skills that you need to work on. That's all your dominoes. And what you want to do is find that first domino and knock it down. And what that does is it makes the other things irrelevant or much easier to knock down. So think of those comprehension things as the other dominoes. So if we address some of those underlying language skills, sometimes those comprehension issues can clear up. Or when we get to working on comprehension, they're a lot easier to address and our students are ready to respond to those treatments. And it makes it much easier for our students to actually improve those skills if we address some of those other underlying language issues first. And what we've found is that when it comes to reading comprehension specifically, when we're trying to figure out what that domino is that when we think about what we actually need to comprehend, we're not able to comprehend text if we don't know at least 90 to 95% of the words in the text. So I think about my craniofacial class that I took in grad school. That was the really hard class that everybody freaked out about. I didn't know a lot of those terms in there, so I'd end up reading it over and over and not understanding what I read. But if I read a novel and I knew all of the words and I knew the context, then it was a lot easier to understand. So that's really what happens a lot of times when we have those comprehension breakdowns. And another thing that we don't always realize, or maybe that we sometimes skim over because we just have so many things that we're working on, is that not only do we need to know the words, but if the reader, and this quote is taken from an article by, I believe, Cheryl Scott, and it's called A Case for the Sentence in Reading Comprehension. The email that I'm sending you with your CMH certificate and your testing time saver will also have a reference list, so you can check this article out. You should be able to log into the ASHA website and find it. But she said, if a reader cannot derive meaning from individual sentences that make up a text, then that's going to be a major obstacle in text level comprehension. So basically, if you can't understand the word and the sentence, you're not going to understand the whole paragraph. And a lot of times we jump ahead to the whole paragraph because that's what students are being asked to do in the classroom, but we're really just skimming over those basic skills that they don't have. Now, it's okay for teachers to do that because they've got a specific curriculum that they're following, and a lot of typically developing students that don't have language problems can learn those skills implicitly. And so that's okay for the classroom to be doing that. We just need to know that for our students, that's not always enough. And so what happens if we don't address sentence level comprehension in kids with conditions like developmental language disorder, speech and language impairment? And again, I use those terms synonymously because I know we have some changes in the terminology that we're using. We're going towards developmental language delay instead of specific language impairment. But know that this applies for those conditions and other disabilities that impact language growth as well. So what happens is that if we don't address those things, then they don't get better, and kids might not be able to really make progress with some of those harder comprehension level skills that we teach kids, like stating the main idea. So I wanted to talk about this specific study because it really hones in on some of those skills that do affect reading comprehension. And I think that it really helps focus where the SLP should fit into all of this, because I think that that's where a lot of us really get stuck, is that we don't know where we fit into the mix here. So according to a longitudinal study by Marilyn Nippold, she looked at kids from early elementary school all the way through high school. So she did this massive longitudinal study, and these were the skills that popped out as impacting reading comprehension scores. So topic knowledge, broad knowledge of the topic, lexical knowledge, so that would be like specific word knowledge, word decoding abilities, so being able to read quickly, and then syntactic abilities, being able to understand the syntax and the sentences and how sentences are structured. So really, you need these things intact. And that's really what impacts your ability to comprehend, because there's an issue of cognitive load here. If you can't read quickly and you don't recognize words right away, you're thinking about that and not the overall message of the text that you're reading. So what she found was that kids who had problems with reading comprehension in elementary school still had problems in high school when those deficits in vocabulary and syntax were not resolved. So if we just worked on reading comprehension and didn't work on those underlying skills, those things didn't get better. And the key takeaway is that the problem, if we're skipping to those high-level comprehension skills for kids with language disorders that really need that explicit instruction, is that those kids without disabilities in the classroom might be picking up on those things implicitly. Yes, teachers work on things like grammar, but not to the extent that our students on our caseload need. And they need more direct, explicit attention to those skills, more so than teachers are able to give in the standard classrooms. And that is really essentially where we fit into all of this. So we want to ask ourselves, as a result of these findings, what are those missing pieces? And then where are we best qualified to help? Because a lot of times just the roles in literacy in the schools, it's kind of like a big, oops, sorry, bumping my microphone here. It's like puzzle pieces fitting together where all those things are important. What the teacher's doing is important. What we're doing is important, but it's all got to fit together. And we have different roles in this process. So the one thing that's really popping out here is obviously vocabulary and word knowledge. So if you don't understand those words and that topic knowledge, it's really hard to understand what you're reading. Obviously, vocabulary has to do with language. So really, you are one of the best equipped people to make a huge difference in your students' lives and to really be that one person that can come in and really help them. So really, vocabulary is that first domino. This is where you can get that biggest bang for your buck based on an area that has a massive impact on literacy and overall academic skills. So if we look at students in second grade and look at their vocabulary skills, studies have actually shown that those students who have those strong vocabulary skills in second grade are the ones that are going to be reading well and just doing well overall in high school. And for those kids who are struggling, they have a significantly higher risk of being the kids that are struggling in high school unless we come in and intervene. So really what we want to remember here is that the general education tends to not be enough for them when it comes to those comprehension things, and they need more intensive intervention that they won't get from anyone else besides you, because you are the language expert. You are the one that's trained in diagnosis and in therapy and in just being able to scaffold and give that explicit intervention. And chances are, even if you don't feel like an expert, you're probably closer than you think to being able to really deliver this explicit intervention. So really, this is where we can be the hero. You can be that hero who changes everything for your students. So you can be the one that helps really turn those things around for them and be the person that gives them what they need when that general education curriculum is not enough. But obviously, just saying work on vocabulary is pretty general. And so I started to have this aha moment when I was preparing for my doctoral research. And so I knew that vocabulary was the area I needed to address, but I continued to do research because I needed a system for actually doing that. And so that's what I want to share with you now. And with just prefacing this by saying the first step in learning how, like specific tactics, strategies, materials, games to use, whatever, things like that, is really learning the what. So what are the big picture skills? So I've just explained why we're doing this. Now I'm going to move on to the what. So the important thing to know about vocabulary is, or actually, before I do that, let me just ask you guys a quick question and check in. I am going to, before I move on, I'm going to talk about the specific parts of vocabulary, but I want to check in with the chat. Again, I will answer questions at the end here, but I'm going to pop in because I was talking and I saw some questions coming in. Okay, so it looks like it's mostly people, everybody introducing themselves. Again, thank you so much for being here. And it sounds like we're all on the same page with what we're working on, what we're struggling with here. And then I also see some comments here, just that sometimes it's really hard to tell that what to do when we have kids who come out low on those sentence comprehension tests. Like I see Ashley is in the chat here saying that it's hard to tell what to do when kids score low on that sentence comprehension subtest on the self. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a perfect example of how syntax plays into this. So yes, before I move on though, How many of you feel a little bit better now that we've at least narrowed our focus? I know I haven't told you everything, but are you feeling a little bit better, like, hey, I'm confirming what I'm doing, or I at least know where I can focus and have that big picture? Okay, so I'm going to move on here. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the what in those key areas of vocabulary here. So obviously, another problem with skipping right to paragraph level comprehension is that we're kind of randomly exposing kids to a bunch of different words and structures. And we can't guarantee that they get enough exposure and practice with the right skills. Now, I see a lot of people saying yes, and some people saying, and if you're feeling kind of so-so about it, that's why I want to provide some additional clarification here about what I mean when I say targeting vocabulary. So we've identified it as that big picture skill, but we obviously know that vocabulary is more than just naming and identification of words. And this is where I got tripped up when I was first practicing. So obviously tests that measure vocabulary, you'll have to name a picture, like, what is this? Tell me what this is. Expressive vocabulary. Point to the picture that goes with what I say. So those are the things that we think of when we think of a vocabulary test. But the thing is that vocabulary is more than just that. And this is actually what it is. So when we think about vocabulary, it's actually a big umbrella term. And this is where I think a lot of us get confused, where I got confused personally, and where a lot of vocabulary materials that you might get in catalogs and things like that kind of miss the mark, or maybe they just only give you part of the story. So there's actually 5 components that fit into vocabulary, and they all interact with each other, and they all interact with vocabulary, and they impact our ability to learn and use words. And they are phonology, orthography, morphology, semantics, and syntax. So all 5 of those language areas impact our ability to learn and apply words that we use. And when you think about that, this can really function as our system, because if you address all of these things, this really covers your bases really well when it comes to what kids need to do in those academic language situations where they're reading and writing and things like that. So let me go into each one of those areas to just clarify what I mean. So when I talk about phonology, obviously we know that when we say this word, sometimes we mean a phonological disorder, so a speech sound issue, but it can also have to do with having a phonological representation of a word. So just being able to recognize a word when we hear it and make meaning of those sounds when we hear all of it. So when you hear that word, can you hear all those sounds put together to form that word and then make meaning from it? And then can you produce it? And so obviously sometimes there might be some articulation issues and a kid might still know a word, but there is also a piece to it that's cognitive linguistic, where it's like they don't know the sounds and they don't know what that word is when it's put together. It's kind of like when you heard a word, but you don't really know it that well, so you can't quite say it. It's like on the tip of your tongue. And so that is really what we mean when we're talking about phonology. So part of it is really knowing how the sounds fit together. Then also we have orthography. So this comes into play, especially when we're reading and writing. Now, of course, it is possible to have a good vocabulary if you aren't a strong reader and writer, but it makes it significantly harder, because part of knowing a word is knowing how it looks in print and being able to recognize it like that. That's called having a mental orthographic image. And it's really, when we say sight words, really it's not rote memorization. It's just being able to see those symbols quickly and put meaning to them quickly and know what they mean. So that impacts your vocabulary knowledge as well. Knowing how orthography and the way words are spelled impacts their meaning. A perfect example would be a word that, like stake and stake. So stake that you put in the ground when you're camping to hold your tent down, or stake the meat. Those are spelled differently. Spelling can impact meaning. So orthography plays into vocabulary as well, multiple different ways. And then the other area, the next area, is morphology. So I know I see someone mentioning the prefixes and suffixes. Absolutely. So those word parts impact meanings of words. And this actually, again, I mentioned that all 5 of these areas overlap with each other. So when you're talking about morphology, you're also talking about orthography, because the way that words are spelled and the way that those word parts are spelled impacts their meaning. And having knowledge of morphology can significantly help you to be able to spell the words right and to be able to infer meanings of those words and understand what words mean. And the interesting thing is that we've always thought about this as like, don't address it till 4th or 5th grade or so. And yes, maybe kids aren't able to read and spell words that have multiple morphemes until 4th or 5th grade, but they can still use them in speech, and they can still understand prefixes and suffixes way earlier on. And so we can actually start to work this into our therapy way earlier than we think. So I wanted to pause really quickly before I go on to semantics and syntax to just give you an example of how these things tie together. So in this situation, this is just one example of how these things really, like this, of how phonology, orthography, and morphology fit together, and how this can actually impact what the word means and how it's spelled. So with this word, I know a lot of times when kids are spelling words, we tell them sound it out. But when you are starting to get those words that have multiple morphemes, we don't just want to think about phonology and the sounds. We also want to think about morphology, because look at this word. There's 5 phonemes. That might be hard to remember. But if you can remember that there's 2 morphemes in that word and know what they mean, know what re means and how to spell it, then that's 1 unit. So it would be a lot easier for you to remember those 2 units and know what they mean and know how to spell those, rather than trying to sound it out. And you can see also that you could say, okay, if you know what take means, what does it mean to retake? Well, if you know what re means, you can infer that meaning. So you can see that they all fit in together. And phonology fits in too, because if you look within those morphemes, it makes sense why those words are spelled the way that they are and why we pronounce them the way that they do. So, quick question here. I see a question, where do I get, and I'm not sure if this is for me, but for everybody, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it. So Ashley asks, where do you get your words to target in therapy? And she said, I've asked teachers for grade level appropriate vocabulary words that I can target, so I can target what they're doing in the classroom. Yeah, that's perfect. That is the ideal way to do it. I have a bunch of tier 2 word lists, and that's exactly how I got those words. A lot of those word lists out there, it's like they're so common that chances are, even if you don't take them directly from your students' teachers, the chances are they're going to be coming up. So if you used any tier 2 word list, that would probably be pretty good, but it's always ideal to be able to catch up with teachers to know what they're doing unit by unit. But if it's tier 2, honestly, if you're not always perfectly synced up with the unit, that's probably okay, because those should be words that they need across a lot of different situations. And Ashley says, I have 2, but the teachers don't give them to me. That's difficult as well. I would say one thing that can be really helpful, I got some manuals from a special ed teacher who had some extra teacher manuals that the teachers all had. And I got my tier 2 words from there. And that way I didn't have to track all of the teachers down. I did have a lot of teachers who were pretty good about doing that, but I know that, sometimes you ask and they get busy, or you have to, hound them and hunt them down. So I would see if you could get a hold of some of the materials, and that can be really helpful. All right. So I'm going to move on to the next so we can keep going, and so I can keep this moving along. I wanted to let you know, with morphological awareness, I get a lot of questions about how do we know, this seems like it would be too hard for some of our kids. Kids are able to use affix knowledge to infer meanings of words as early as 1st grade. So even if your kids can't do this perfectly, even if they can't spell the words perfectly or read them perfectly, you can still be working this into your therapy as early as 1st grade. As soon as your kids are starting to read, you can be working that element in and at least pointing it out to your kids. Okay. Now I wanted to move on to semantics. So obviously we're pretty good at semantics. This is really what we think of when we are thinking of vocabulary. This is what the part of vocabulary that has to do with meaning and semantic features. So those pieces of information that are associated with that word that help us understand its meaning. And what I like to do here is go through what I mean when I say semantic features, because if you go through and study these things with your students and really point them out and talk about all these different pieces of information, that can really help with those students that have issues with word retrieval. And so what I'm going to do now is a quick little interactive activity here. I am going to go through semantic features for nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And I'm going to give you a word, and I'm going to describe the semantic features of it and see if you can guess what that word is. So let's start with nouns. So some of the semantic features that you can describe for nouns include things like category, function, physical attributes, composition, parts, associations, and location. Obviously, you know, with a kid with a language issue, sometimes if you ask them, tell me everything you know about this, they'll give you like one thing, or they'll give you like 5 of the same piece of information. Like they'll tell you a bunch of functions, but not any other pieces of information. So when we study semantic features, it helps with that storage, because we're drawing kids' attention to those other pieces of information. So take a look at this, see if you can guess what word I am describing. So it's a kind of animal or a canine. It barks and can hunt. You can walk it and train it. It can be brown, black, gray, or white. It can be small, like 20 pounds, or it can be even bigger, like 80 pounds or even more. It's made of muscles and bones. It has warm blood. It has 4 legs, a tail, floppy ears, sharp teeth. It has, you can use a leash, a food bowl, or chew toys and collar, and you can find it in a doghouse or a kennel. And yes, it's a dog. And yes, this is very similar to the expanding expression tool. That is also a tool that helps you do semantic feature analysis with a mnemonic device. This is slightly different because I call physical attributes. I include things besides what it looks like. And I break apart the parts. So I also include associations in there. But the general thing here is that it's always good to start with category, because it helps your students to learn good definitions. So you can see that these are all the pieces of information, and it was very clear what I was talking about. And, you know, this is a lot of information that I was able to come up with because I was organized and I was able to use those pieces of information to think of things. So I wanted to do verbs and adjectives because I think a lot of us know how to do this for nouns, but obviously a lot of those words that our kids have to study are verbs and adjectives as well. So semantic features for verbs that you can do are synonyms, antonyms, context of action, purpose and method, and associated nouns. So obviously we know what synonyms and antonyms are. Those are really important pieces of information that help us define verbs. So one way that we would define a verb would obviously be to state a synonym. The context of action would be the context in which you would do that action. So like, when would you do it? The purpose or method would be more of the why or the how you would do something. And then associated nouns would be any things associated with that action. So let's see if you can guess what word I'm talking about here. For synonyms, let me see here. So this means the same thing as jogging or sprinting. It's the opposite of walking, standing, or just strolling leisurely. You might do it when you're racing or competing, or you might also do it when you're in danger. The reason you would do it is to get somewhere quickly, and how you would do it is you're propelling yourself forward one step at a time. And some things you might use would be athletic shoes, a track, and a stadium. So people are saying running, so you're correct. So you can see that I was very descriptive here, and I gave you a lot of pieces of information. Now I am going to see if I can stump you with the last example here with adjectives. So with adjectives, what you can do is things like synonyms, antonyms, associated nouns, and associated verbs. So synonyms and antonyms, we talked about that. Associated nouns would again be things that are associated with whatever that descriptor is. And then verbs would be things that might make you feel that way, or any actions that might have to do with that descriptor. So I tend to stun people on this one, but let's see if you can at least get in the ballpark. Now, if you're doing this, you don't always have to do the guessing game like I'm doing right now. But if you are with a word like this, where there's a lot of possibilities, obviously having some multiple choices might be a good idea. So let's see what we come up with. So it means the same as happy and ecstatic. It's the opposite of being sad and depressed. And it is, we might feel this way when we're around friends, family, or when we make an amazing accomplishment, or when we have an unexpected pleasant surprise. And some actions that might go with this feeling would be achieving something, enjoying, being thrilled or excited, doing an exciting or enjoyable activity. So people are saying things like proud, grateful, joyful, excited. So again, all words that would be totally appropriate. The word is elated. So you can see there that you can do this. Yay, Katie said elated. I'm not sure if you said that as I was saying it, or if you got it. Yep. Okay. So good job if you said elated. Carissa, I see you said it as well. So good job. And thank you for participating in that. But the important thing here is that we want to draw attention to all of these different things. So now you can see an example of how we might do that. So that's semantics. Want to move on to syntax. Now, I think we know why semantics is important, but I think a lot of us, including myself, when I started out, I didn't realize how important syntax was and how it tied in to vocabulary. So obviously, one of the things that we want to have kids do is show us that they can use words, and no one will be able to use the word if they can't say it in a sentence, and no one will be able to use the vocabulary we teach them in sentences if they don't have a good sense of sentence structure. So there are certain types of sentences that are really important. If you have my sentence structure guide that I sent out to you before this webinar, you know some of them. But the one that really stands out as just really being, like I say, is the comprehension killer, because it's linked to deficits in both comprehension and language expression, is complex sentences. So this is the one that is just really, really hard for kids with language disorders, because it relies so much on just processing those little connecting words and function words, and not just the content words. And you can't rely on word order when you're comprehending or when you're trying to understand a complex sentence. So that's why syntax is so important. So if you left this presentation just working on one thing in syntax, if it was complex sentences, you would be making a significant improvement, and you'd be really helping your students if you just picked one type of sentence to work on. So this is why complex sentences are so difficult. If we look at this sentence here, we've got two clauses. So this is a complex sentence because we have an independent clause right here that can stand alone as a complete sentence. And then we have a subordinate clause that is not a complete sentence unless it's attached to this independent clause here. So subordinate clause and independent clause are the same thing. We've also got a subordinate conjunction here that's helping us connect those ideas together and showing us how these two parts of the sentence are related, because it's telling us the order of when they happened. So the important thing here is that when we have temporal conjunctions like this, we need to remember that last clause, but we also need to remember what happened first. And then we need to remember that word after and remember what it means. And then we have to remember what after means. And then we have to remember which came first and which came second. So that's a lot of information to process at once. It's really hard for our kids with language disorders. And you can kind of see here, if we don't know what the words mean or we don't know the purpose of the words, it's really hard to understand the sentence. So those are really those key pieces here. And when we go back to that research that Nippold did, we can actually tie those things that popped out as correlating with reading comprehension to these skills, these essential 5 skills. So topic knowledge and lexical knowledge obviously are tied heavily into syntax, word decoding abilities, obviously phonology, morphology, and orthography all fit into that. And syntax, obviously, there's a direct correlation there. Now, this isn't the only way they fit together because those 5 areas all impact each other, but this is just an easy way to help simplify it and understand how those things can all impact reading. So back to that first domino. Essentially, how we knock it down is by diving into these 5 areas with our students. So what I mean by getting meta is being direct. So you're talking directly about these rules because they might not pick up on them if you don't do it that way, if you don't explain them directly. And again, those 5 areas where we want to get meta with our students, and we want to teach them explicitly with the understanding that these will all impact comprehension, or when we get to that work on high-level comprehension and narratives and things like that, that will be significantly easier to address. So those 5 areas were phonology, orthography, morphology, semantics, and syntax. So the question I always ask here is, so now that we have walked through this and now we've kind of fine-tuned this area, do you think that it would be possible, if you have been struggling with your students to try to get them to reaching their goals, do you think that would be more possible if you had someone to walk you through this, or if you had a better system for doing this? So go ahead and let me know in the chat. If you feel like, if you had a way to actually walk through this, if you had someone lay it out for you, and you really just had a process for working through all of these elements. Okay, so I'm seeing some people say yes in the chat. And the second question here, and this is the kicker, do you want to be able to do that without sacrificing your life outside of work? So obviously there's a lot of things we could do, but we only have so much time in the day. Okay, great. So what I want to do now is just share an opportunity for you to be able to do that. So all of these things that I've walked through with you tonight is exactly what I do for people in my Language Therapy Advanced Premium program for SLPs. So essentially what I do is walk through this entire system and teach you this entire process that took me years to put together so that I could finally get the results that I knew I was capable of getting with my students at the beginning, but I couldn't do because I didn't have a good system. So what it actually is an online training program for SLPs where I walk you through the system I just shared with you for the purpose of building those language skills your students need for school and life. And I'm just going to quickly, just for a couple minutes, let you know what's involved with it. But the whole purpose is to help you make that transformation in your therapy so that you can help your students make those transformations so that they can get on the right path so that they can be successful adults someday. So what it actually involves is that every month, again, it's an online training program, and every month I publish one new video training. There's a huge video library with different trainings, and then I'm adding a new one every month, and I am showing you the systems and the strategies that will help you to implement this system that I just shared with you tonight. So some of the things that I address in those trainings are, again, things that will teach you how to address phonology, orthography, morphology, semantics, and syntax. And each training focuses on a specific piece of that system in bite-sized chunks, so it's not overwhelming for you, so that you can develop a new habit 1 month at a time. And the most important thing is that I show you how to do it without spending hours on planning and paperwork. So each training is just 1 to 2 hours long, and then specific action steps that show you exactly what to do in your therapy. Now, the question I usually get here is, what about materials? Do I have to collect my own materials, or how do I do that? So now I know myself, I tended to be kind of a materials hoarder and just have a bunch of stuff. So the important thing here is that when you learn the system, you'll be better able to organize that stuff and figure out what you can get rid of. I also include a materials library. So anytime I give you a video training and teach you a technique, I give you the materials to use it. So there is a huge materials library and I'm adding to it all the time, but everything that I show you how to do, I give you what you need to implement it with with all the techniques that I'm showing you. And obviously you can always supplement with other things, but the main thing here is that you want to learn the system before the materials so that you understand the process quickly. So I give you everything you need to do it. And what's included, so just some examples in that materials library. So I have things like these ultimate guides to syntax with over 300 worksheets that will help you to work on things like complex sentences. So templates to work on definitions. So you're studying words and to do semantic feature analysis, similar to what we did tonight. Some flashcards for working on WH questions, a protocol for studying morphological analysis. And I also have a manual with a goal bank and language report scripts so that I can help you with those behind the scenes things as well. Again, so you're not spending hours and hours doing paperwork and you have a good system. And I'm always adding more. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to keep giving you this information, just a couple more minutes, and then I will answer questions. But if you wanted to get some more information, I am going to post a link in the chat here. So this link that I am going to show you has a button that you can push. It'll take you to another page. You should be able to keep your browser open and still be watching the webinar, but there is a materials library tour on that page. So if you wanted to check that out, you can do that as well. So what else is involved here is really that everything in the program is evidence-based. I've done extensive research on all of it, and I've cited all of that research for you and really gone through the best of the best techniques for language therapy so that you don't have to worry about digging through research and materials. I essentially have done that for you. Now, compared to a lot of the other things that are out there, obviously there are a lot of other good materials, but really this is the only place that gives you a complete evidence-based system so that you can go to work confident that you're giving your students exactly what they need to eventually be successful adults. Now, another question that I sometimes get is that, we want to know what happens when we get stuck, because a lot of times when you go to professional development, we find that we get really excited about it. And then when we go to implement it, we aren't really sure what to do. And I don't want that to happen to you. So that's why there is let me move on to the next part here. That's why there is also a coaching component to it. So in addition to the video trainings and the materials library, I also do monthly online coaching calls where you can ask questions and get your questions answered. So I can guide you through that. Again, we always have that awkward learning stage when we're learning something new. I want to guide you through that process so that you can actually make a difference in your therapy. So I get online calls exactly like this one, this same platform, and I answer your questions about anything that comes up that's challenging for you along the way. And we also have a private members Facebook group where you can get your questions answered as well. So again, to get more information about the program and learn how you can join us and learn that system for getting those students to their least restrictive environment and boosting those language skills so they can have that transformation, you can click that button that is in the chat. Now, a question that I sometimes get about these techniques that I've shown you tonight that I teach in the program is, will this work for me and will this work for my students? Because, there's a lot of different cases out there and not every technique is appropriate for every student. So I wanted to give you some examples right now of some students in the program and some things that have been shared by current members in the Facebook group so you can tell if this is for you. So this is Elizabeth, and she shared a success story here of what she did when she was actually working with a student who had a number of different things going on. So she was addressing fluency and articulation in addition to language. So she was using the techniques in the program for language, and she noticed that she could actually use some of those language techniques to promote carryover for some of her other goals. And this is a story that she shared where a student had an aha moment. So he was actually able to carry over some of those things that she was doing when she was studying words with her student. And she found that he had one of those aha moments when he actually applied some of those skills. So this was a sixth grader who is one of those students who would be likely pulled out for some extra help in the general education for most of the day with a speech and language IEP with multiple goal areas. So this works for that kind of student. This is Wendy, and she actually used this with a number of different students. So Wendy has had a very diverse caseload. She had all the way from early childhood all the way up through high school. And so she wasn't using it as much with the really young kids that weren't doing any reading, but she was using it basically kindergarten on up for those students who were anything beyond life skills. So students who had academic struggles, so kids who were expected to be on the academic track, not a life skills track, but were expected to learn to read and were expected to be doing academic work and vocabulary. So she was able to get results with those kinds of students. Again, kids that had kind of a mix of students who had speech as a related service with some other support from special education, but also those kids who had language issues, and she was the only one providing services. And then the final student I want to tell you about, just some other examples here, is Connie. Now, when Connie started the program, she said she was spending more time planning for therapy than she was actually in the therapy. So if she had a 30-minute session, it took her more than 30 minutes to get ready for that session, which, a lot of us feel like that. Our planning is just insane for language because we have to put it together from scratch. And so one of the biggest things that she found was that she was able to cut that in half. So she was spending half of the time planning. And so she was literally able to just spend significantly less time planning. But the types of students she was using this with is that she had a high school student who had been in speech for a really long time, was sick of it, and was just bored. And she started to do some of these techniques where she was really studying words with him. And they were focusing on tier 2 words and going through all of those 5 areas. And she started to get interested. She was kind of bored with it too. And he started to get interested, and he actually started to bring his own words to therapy from books that he was reading. So she was able to make progress with a high school student. So really the framework works all the way from kindergarten up to high school if you have students who are on that academic track. So it's really for students who are struggling with reading and writing and who are doing some of that, at least emergent reading, all the way up to high school. And the way that you modify it to make it appropriate is just that you use the same system and techniques. You just maybe add some more visuals for the younger kids, or you make the vocabulary harder. So that's really who it's appropriate for. And those are the type of students who have gotten results. So again, you can click that button in the chat for more information, but here's a summary of what you get if you join. So again, that's 1 video training per month. So should clarify that it's 1 new video training per month. So I feature a different training every month and give you a piece of new information, but there's also, once the training, like we have a featured training every month, and once the month passes, that goes into an archive section so you can see all the months that have passed if you miss a month. So right now there is about 6 months worth of video trainings in there for you now, and then I'm publishing a new one every month with the goal of really easing you in and teaching you a new habit or strategy each month. Then there's the materials library that supplements those video trainings so you know exactly what to do and you have materials that you can use to implement the techniques. And then there's also the coaching to guide you through this. So the online coaching calls that happen every month on this platform that we're on now, and then the private members Facebook group for support. So obviously, if I offered all of these things separate every year, that would be over $1,500. But obviously, I am not going to charge you that much for that. So what it is, in order to become a member, it's $37 per month if you want to pay month per month and join on the monthly membership. But if you join on the annual plan where you pay for the entire year up front, you actually save $100 and get 2.5 months free. So that ends up being less than $1 per day. So I wanted to mention also this week, I actually have a special bonus for people who sign up for that annual membership. So I mentioned, we talk about knocking down those dominoes, that vocabulary is that first domino, and that helps you build a significant amount of a momentum. And so I teach you how to do that in Language Therapy Advanced Premium. But then there are times when we need to address some of those other dominoes further down the line and really tie it together for some students. And so I have a course called The Art and Science of Narrative Language that helps you do that. So basically what it helps you do is, once you've really worked on vocabulary and built that foundation, helps you tie it together by working on narratives. And if you are struggling to get into the classroom and you are struggling to figure out how to actually co-teach with your students and you're not really sure how to bridge that gap, or maybe you can't co-teach at all and you still want to make your therapy super functional, this course will answer all of those questions. So it works whether you're doing pull in or push out. Pull out or push in. So what that means, just to clarify, is that if you sign up for the annual membership by Friday, you can become a member and you're paid for your whole year up front. And then I also will give you the Art and Science of Narrative Language course for free. So this is all of what you will get if you decide to sign up for the annual membership by Friday. So again, the video trainings every month, the materials library, the online coaching and private members Facebook group, then plus the time-sensitive bonus that is available till Friday for annual members, which is the Art and Science of Narrative Language. So again, if you sign up for the annual membership within the next 48 hours, you save $100 and you get the narrative course free. And then also, if you join it at any of those membership options, whether you do the monthly or the annual, you lock in your rate. So just a couple more things here before I start answering questions. I do want to mention, because I know that it's stressful if you are in a school where you've got to get administrative approval for funding, or maybe you are paying out of pocket for your continuing education, that I do offer a 60-day money-back guarantee. So basically, I let you try the program for 60 days risk-free, and if you don't like it, you get your money back. So you have 2 full months to go through all the trainings and see if you like it and see if you think it's appropriate for your students. And if you don't like it and if you don't think it's appropriate, then I will give you a full refund. So now you essentially have a choice. So you can keep, if you feel like you have been struggling with language therapy and you feel like you're not making progress, you can keep getting results like this, like I was at the very beginning of my career, or you can make the choice to have that transformation and finally be getting results more like this and getting your students to meet their goals and being able to do that and still having a life outside of therapy. And so you have a choice. So you can do what you've always done that maybe hasn't gotten you the results that you've wanted, or you can join me and really get that shortcut that's taken me years to do and just let me walk you through it. So all you need to do is click that button and that will show you how to join. Okay. So looks like some of you haven't been able to see the slides. Okay, so I am going to undo my screen share, and I'm going to just answer questions for you because it sounds like some of my slides froze. So thanks for everybody who has stayed on and has questions for me. Okay, let me undo my screen share, and then I'm going to show some of those other slides as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the slide that gives you the summary of everything so that you can see what you're getting. Okay, here we go. Let me show you the screen share again. And I do see a couple questions. All right. So question from Katie, if you join monthly, can you stop at any time? Yes, you can stop at any time if you do the monthly. And so let's see. So yeah, with the monthly, you just let me know when you want to stop. And Anne asked, do you use this with children with cognitive delays? And yeah, saying that the research is always based on SLI and DLD, kids who are higher. It depends. I would say if they're mild cognitive delays, you can use it. If they're really, really low, like, for example, I have some kids who are like my high school students who are in the life skills program where we're doing things that are really functional, like learning how to do laundry and things like that. I don't use it as much with those students, but my students who are milder, who are still doing some academic work, I do use it with them. I do the semantic feature analysis with the students with cognitive delays, not as much the work on morphology and some of that deep work on syntax. I know that I do have one of my students, Connie, and I don't know if you guys actually saw those. Let me pop back through and show you those things that my students said, just in case you missed those slides, just so you can get an idea of whether or not this is right for you. Let me see if I can find those. Okay. Oops. Facebook group. Okay. So this is Elizabeth. This is what Elizabeth had to say. I'll just read it, a couple things really quick. So again, a rising sixth grader read a story today, was writing responses to the comprehension questions. We did semantic feature analysis so we could define a vocabulary word as required by one of the questions. And I praised him for the detail he included. And then he asked how he thought we might combine sentences to improve his written response. So you can see this type of student this type of student a little bit higher, maybe not one of your really low cognitive students. But my student, Connie, she actually did do some of the work on sentences with some students that were a little bit lower, that were really not using a lot of sentences. So one of the things that's in the program is that I give you templates to actually define a word using an Aristotelian definition after semantic feature analysis. So Connie was using those with students who were lower and seeing some results. So it is possible. I would say that a lot of these things are really good for those students who are like, you really want them to be readers, and you know that they could be readers, but they are just not reading where they should be for their grade level. So yes, it is possible to watch this again. It will be, as soon as this webinar is done, the replay link will go out. So you will get an email later on tonight with your link for the testing time saver for the CMH certificate references, and that'll also have your replay link. And then you'll probably get one more after that. Okay. Okay, so questions about, let's see, I'm going to go to the top of the chat here. Will all students with developmental language disorder and speech and language impairment benefit from this? Which tests do you recommend, or identifying where to start? I feel most tests pinpoint grammatical errors, but not language processing. Okay, So a lot of questions in there. So I would say that yes, the program is really designed for kids with language disorders. That is really their primary thing. So I'd say yes to your first question. Which test do I recommend? Well, I would say that testing time saver that you're going to get later will answer that question for you. I've got a lot of the ones that I use. The Self 5 is okay, but I know that one has gotten a little bit of heat for the sensitivity and specificity. It's good that it gives you all the different areas, but it has been known to maybe score kids a little bit higher in certain demographics. One that I definitely recommend looking into is the TILS, which really gives you a breakdown of a lot of different language areas. Couple other ones that I like the TOLD. Again, it doesn't go into the reading and writing, but it does help to address some of those grammatical issues. So those are a couple that you might want to look into. I would say the big one, the newer one that really dives into those areas is the TILS. Okay, so question about, Ashley has a question about whether this works for kids who are more severe or kids who have milder delays. I would say that this is the most appropriate for the mild to moderate. If they have really, really severe issues, then it is a little bit harder to see progress. I would say with those students, it's more about getting them to that next level of independence rather than, getting them out of special ed, because it just might not be realistic for them. So I would say I use a modified version of some of these techniques. Like, again, I use semantic feature analysis, even for my students who are a little bit lower. I do, one of the techniques that I teach in the program is sentence combining. And I do that with my students who are lower because you never know when they're going to respond. So I would say definitely mild to moderate kids, you can really do this from K through 12. For the kids that are more severe, I usually try it in those early grades. But once we get to junior high and high school, and we've kind of hit that point where we've got to make the decision whether it's life skills or academic. If they're life skills, I tend to switch to more functional things rather than academic. So it's less appropriate for those kids. And my take on the EET, don't like saying that sometimes kids don't make progress at all using the EET. So with, and this isn't, again, not EET specific, but semantic feature analysis in general, when you do an activity like the one I did with you all tonight, that helps with semantics and really like bringing that information out. But what we have to do in order for students to apply it is also work in syntax. So this applies whether you're using the EET or you're doing semantic feature analysis with, a different mnemonic device. Like I didn't use exactly the EET tonight, but I went through semantic features. So what we need to do is not just do semantic feature analysis, but also tie in syntax. So what I do, and this is something that I talk about in the program, is that I will teach you how to brainstorm the semantic features, but then I also teach you how to take that and put it into a sentence. And I have some specific sentence frames for doing that so that kids carry it over, because you're right. If you don't address syntax directly, kids don't always know how to take that information and organize it. So you're kind of like, it's like when you're cleaning your room, like you're pulling all this stuff out and it's like, oh, I have all this stuff. Now I need to figure out where to put it. So sometimes you have to show them where to put it and give them structure. I mean, really the thing to take away is that's why we have 5 components, not just one. Like semantics is extremely important, but we've got to have those other 5 areas as well. So tying in syntax is really, really an important element for them to be able to carry over with semantic feature analysis. Okay, thank you so much for everybody for the great comments and for everybody who has taken the time to watch. Again, I will be sending out a replay. Check your email later tonight and tomorrow morning. And thank you for your patience with the slides. I hope that you're able to get all of the information that you needed. Again, let me go to, now that you've been able to see some of the information that that was shared. And again, some of this information just about the program will be on that page when you click over to that, where it says click to join. You won't join, obviously, when you hit that button. You'll be taken to the page where you can sign up. So again, this is, if you sign up for the monthly, you get all of this, and you just are paying month by month. But if you decide to do the annual membership, you get all of this. So you get the monthly membership is $37 a month, and then the yearly ends up being $344 per year, which ends up being $100 cheaper. And if you sign up for the annual, then you also get that narratives course for free. So it's like getting $200 off. Let me find my other summary slide here. There you go. Just so that you have an idea of what is involved. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? Thank you for being a fantastic audience tonight and being so interactive and playing along with my semantic features analysis game, and for being awesome SLPs. Okay. Oh, another question. I hope I missed this one, but it was a while back. So Michelle asked, don't you have to teach categories, functions, synonyms, and antonyms before using the semantic feature strategy? Actually, no, you don't. You can work on them one at a time, but you actually can make this a little more contextualized and work on them all at once. What you'll find is that with categories, when you are working on getting your kids to do a definition, that actually is something that kids have a hard time using a category and a definition in the early grades, like kindergarten through first grade. So you can actually start working on this whole thing together to really get them to understand that structure of, like, a dog is a kind of an animal, because sometimes they don't know how to give that categorical information in the definitions. So it's important to be able to teach it all together, because then that helps them learn that format. So if you've been working on those things separately, there's nothing wrong with that, but it'll just give you that extra edge and really help tie it together for your students if you do it all at once. Now, obviously, you don't expect your students to learn all of it. You know, you don't expect your kids to remember all of those different features, but if you give them some type of visual, that helps make it easier for them to retrieve all that information. That's a good question. Another question about what does it look like in therapy for the little ones? So really, with any of these strategies, they are, with semantic feature analysis, I end up just using way more visuals. And so I'm writing things down for the older kids. I might be writing things down for the younger kids, but I am just supplementing with more pictures and images with the little guys. And I'm using words that are less complex. Okay. So thank you again for your time tonight. Again, if you are interested in joining, and if you want to learn this system that has really helped me to transform my practice, again, that bonus for that narratives course is going away Friday. So if you've been kind of sitting on the fence, thinking about joining, then, again, now is the time to act, because that bonus is going away Friday. You'll be able to get that narratives course for free in addition to that yearly membership. So again, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I am going to sign off. Feel free to email me with any questions, and your webinar replay and all of your information should be coming to you shortly. So good night, everybody.